If Sepharadi is a way of thinking, not just an ethnicity, then why are there so many different communities of Sephardim, some with old and more mainstream standing, who do not agree? For example, many Sephardim are mystical and many are not. I will not get today into Kabbalah, no Kabbalah, it's not my conversation today. I think it's fair to say that in my opinion, everything I'm going to say now is my opinion, there is no one type of Sephardi. Maran himself spent his whole life trying to unite the Sephardim who already split up, and anybody who's read any of the northern Spain and southern Spain, Andalusia and Catalonia, there's no one Sephardi. I think everybody wants to be the one Sephardi, but I think there are similarities among Sephardic philosophy, and again, it's not ethnicity, but there are Sephardic philosophies. There are things you can draw lines, parallels between Sephardic Chachamim. Professor Tzvi Zohar has written on this extensively. I saw a professor write a rebuttal, like 3 pages. It wasn't even worth the paper it was written on. But a rebuttal to Tzvi Zohar's romanticization of Sepharad. I don't think Tzvi Zohar is wrong at all. If anything, he's the world authority on this topic. I have not yet merited to engage with him personally, but B'ezrat Hashem, it will happen. I will tell you that you mentioned a Sephardi way of thinking, and I think that whenever I speak about Sephardim, Chachmei Sfarad, and then you go walk into most local Sephardic synagogues, you probably will never see what I am thinking of in my head. In fact, you'll probably see the exact opposite of anything that you've ever heard any Sephardic Chacham say. And so really I want to answer your question of why, if Sephardic is a way of thinking, why are there so many communities who are ethnically Sephardic, but philosophically they're exactly opposite anything Chachmei Sfarad ever were? I once told somebody that some of the Sephardic communities of today are the worst enemies of authentic Sephardic Judaism. I think, by the way, that those Ashkenazim who have joined and accepted Sephardic philosophy and outlook are some of the better Sephardim that I know in my life. So again, I'm using this term as a philosophical term, not an ethnic term. I would blame this trend on the decline on 3 steps. Really, the first, it's found in the writings of Rabbi Moshe David Gaon, the father of the famous singer and actor Yoram Gaon. He has a book on the Me'am Lo'ez, the famous book from Turkey, in which he writes that all you have to know to see the decline of Sephardic tradition is to go to any of the descendants of any of the illustrious Sephardic traditions and find the general population of them, not the general population, and just engage with them. And you'll see how far removed, how much of a decline has been from the illustrious ancestry of their forefathers. Why? So I think he mentions a great point, and that is that Sephardic Jews, not all, I cannot speak across the board. There's some communities that struggled with less. Once we left Sephardic countries, especially for Israel, and some places in America, not all, there are some communities that stayed strong in other places. They went from flourishing to survival mode, like most immigrants. And when you go into survival mode, you don't have the luxury to think of books and philosophies and theologies and approach. And you're trying to make enough money to live. You're trying to fight racism in government. You're trying to deal with your children being forced away from you and kidnapped. You're dealing with survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you simply don't have the luxury to continue doing things the way you always did. And while you are in survival mode, I think one of the greatest things that happened was a disconnect from our Chachamim. And then while we were disconnected from our Chachamim, some great Chachamim that left Morocco, left Iraq, left Turkey, find themselves in Israel, sitting in the back of some little synagogue. Nobody even knows who they are. They were the Av Bet Adin, they were the Rosh Hashiva, they're nothing, they were nobodies. My father's community growing up, Yemenite Talmidei Chamim, that Tanakh by heart, Rambam by heart, they were the teachers, they were the mori. His job was to sweep the streets for the municipality. While some more connected guy with a last name that came from Poland, he got the job of chief rabbi. Why? Because that's the way that it works. So disconnect from our Chachamim, but then a direct connection to new rabbis that were not of that breed, that were not of that style, that were not... I think to myself a lot about myself. I'm putting myself vulnerably here. In a vulnerable situation. If I had not left Baltimore and met Harav Peretz, where would I be today? Baltimore did tremendous things for me. I'm grateful for the Torah that I learned there and the rabbis that I connected to. I don't have negative things to say. But I understand why the graduates of so many yeshivot, they're Sephardim in their accent, and Sephardim in their Siddur, maybe Sephardim in some of their halachot. But in the outlook, where were they supposed to get that outlook from? In the halls of study of Lithuania? In the Batei Midrash of Russia or Poland? Of course not. And so that means that even those who connected with Sephardic Chachamim, connected with Chachamim that really don't know much about the Sepharad in which they came from. Rav Faur, I quoted this when Rav Faur passed away. I had a video on his Shivan and Shloshim. But I saw that Sina Kahin, should live and be well, he wrote a very important book, 2 books already, called Ideas. I highly recommend. I rarely recommend books, but I highly recommend. Sina translated from the Hebrew into the following. He writes, Chacham Faur. This is also the Hebrew introduction to Rabbi Israel Moshe Chazan. These matters are well known. There's almost nothing novel in them. Nonetheless, I saw it fit to write them in a book because it is the way of the Sepharadi rabbis, that their creations in all areas of Jewish thought, their outlook on Judaism in general and about current issues in particular, are unknown. Something terrible is taking place in regard to everything which is connected to the cultural, religious, and educational tradition of the Sepharadi Jews in our times. Things that in the recent past were known to every rabbinic student are unknown today even to those who are referred to, quote, as giants of the generation. We, who were raised in the ancient educational tradition which was kept alive for generation after generation in the house of study of the Sephardim, see the new state of affairs with a heavy heart and despondent eyes. The bridges with the past have been destroyed. The markers along the road have been uprooted. The pathways have been erased and covered with dirt. What will the young one who wishes to reveal his past do? Where will he turn? Who will show him the way? I think this is the truth. That's the state of affairs we're in today. If I can end with the words of a rabbi who I don't know personally. I've met him a few times, but not very well. His name is Rabbi Yosef Biton. He wrote an important book, a small but important book called Forgotten Giants, Sephardic Rabbis Before and After the Expulsion from Spain. In his introduction to the book, he writes that these rabbis of Sepharad struggled under very difficult circumstances and even gave their lives to keep Judaism vibrant, leaving us an impressive legacy for generations to come. Somehow, what the Catholic Inquisition and the Spanish and Portuguese kings and queens were not able to do, our indifference has accomplished. Indifference. Many of these rabbis have disappeared from Jewish awareness, and the Jewish people, whom these leaders labored with so much passion to preserve, has not in turn preserved them. I think that this is the word, indifference. What's created rifts in Sephardic Jewry time immemorial is our indifference to our Chachamim, to the beautiful Torah that they gave us, and the relevance of that Torah to the world today. Going forward, our Chachamim have an outlook that I believe, don't have to agree, is the healthiest one possible. And so when I think about Mashiach, now I have to turn this into the last question. When I think about the Mashiach, and I think about Shiviti, and I think about Shulchan Aruch, and I think about the dream of uniting the Jewish people, and I think about getting rid of Sepharadim and Ashkenazim, ironically what comes to my mind is the need to adopt a Judaism whose philosophy was about uniting and not dividing, whose philosophy was about adaptation, not just survival, whose philosophy was not about shunning the world, but about embracing it, whose philosophy was inclusive and wholesome and balanced. That's the only way we'll go forward. And so tonight, I want to wish you all, thank you so much for learning with me. Thank you so much for being part of our Shiviti Learning Forum throughout the year, of our Pesach Kashrut Forum. I have just one final request for you.